I'm Robert Myers, Planning Manager with the City of Urbana. I want to welcome you all here tonight for first, we're going to be holding two meetings tonight, and one of the primary purposes would be to elect a chair of these two boards. So for a few moments, if you don't mind, I'll just call the meeting to order. First, we'd like to call the Urbana Design Review Board to order. And if I could have a roll call, please. Terry.
Ms. Engelbretson? Here. Mr. Hunsinger?
Here.
Ms. Matheny? Here. Mr. Otto?
Here.
Mr. Poss?
Here.
Ms. Smith? Here. And Ms. Stillinger? Here.
Okay, we do have a quorum. And at this point, we normally ask for any changes to the agenda, and I assume there are none. Next, we have approval of minutes. This is from the March 17th, 2011 meeting minutes. Does anyone need any additional time to review minutes, or does anyone have a motion for approval or amendment? Move for approval. Kim Smith moves for approval. Second from Kevin Hunsinger. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye and no. Okay, the ayes have it. The minutes are approved from March 17th, 2011. Communications. As part of your packet, there's a couple of items I think maybe I will talk about later under staff report or study session, if that's okay. One is just a copy of a frequently asked questions about the Illinois Open Meetings Act, and I thought as long as we're meeting tonight, maybe I would just go over some highlights of things some tips I would suggest watching out for. And the other is, actually maybe we should talk about this for a second. Can everyone hear me? Okay. You have in your packet a schedule for the Urbana Design Review Board. These are regular meeting dates that we set once a year, and we publish them online and elsewhere at the city. We have them on display, and that helps us meet our Open Meeting Act requirements. Now, it's been in the past we've ended up canceling quite a few meetings, and essentially what we say is that we meet on an as-needed basis, but these are the dates that we could possibly meet. So we would let you know in advance about any upcoming meetings that we would need you for. But in the past year, you guys are going to have to help me here. We've met how many times now in the past year? Once in the past year. So there's definitely not a overbearing load of cases that we've been having so far. Having said that, I want to thank you all for your service, because when we do meet, it's really important for the community and also for the applicants and for the property owners, so they can get their project reviewed and comments back, and hopefully approval if that's appropriate for that case. But when it comes up, it is really important. And again, we'll talk about this in a minute in terms of procedures, but this brochure that's part of your packet, Urbana Design Review Board, it lists all the names of the board members and a summary of procedures for public hearings. We can cover that in a minute. Those are the two communications I wanted to point to. Item number 5 on the agenda, continued public hearings. We have none. Old business. We have none. New public hearings. We have no new public hearings. Item number 8 on the agenda, new business. We come to election of chairperson. And I guess first I would ask if there's anyone who would be interested in serving as the chair. Essentially, the role of the chair is to keep the meeting on track and make sure it's a fair and open. The procedures are open and fair, that everyone is heard fairly, and to keep the meeting moving along. Open the public hearing, close the public hearing, call for any discussion or motions, and I'm sure that people's property rights are upheld in terms of public public hearings. So is there anyone who would be interested in serving as chair? Or nominating someone
I would like to make a nomination.
Okay, Kim Smith would like to nominate.
I'd like to nominate Jeff Pass
Okay.
as chairperson. I'll second.
Alice Engelbretson seconds. Would that be acceptable to you, Mr. Boss? Okay. All right. With the motion and the second, can I hear well, let's do a roll call vote. I don't remember if it just by voice or by roll call. I want her to do roll call.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yes.
Ms. Matheny? Mr. Otto?
Yes.
Mr. Pass? Ms. Smith? Ms. Stillinger?
Yes.
And Ms. Engelbretson?
Yes.
All right. With that motion approved, then Jeffrey Pass will be the new chair for the Urbana Design Review Board. And if you'd like to, you could you can take over from here in terms of the agenda. It's a packed agenda. It's going to be rough, but yes.
Is that okay? That's on. Well, thank you very much for the nomination, and I hope I serve you well, whether we meet or don't meet. It's an awesome responsibility. I guess the next item on the agenda is audience participation. Since there's no old business, is there any audience to participate? No? Moving right along, do we have any staff reports?
Okay, good.
I'll just give you a report on what we have done. We have reviewed some applications administratively, and so if you'll remember, we have different levels of review, and so some projects in the design review corridors, something like replacing roof shingles with like for like, not changing any roof lines and so on, that would not require review. And then there are certain types of projects that would require review, but not by the full board. And that would be very small, insignificant changes, and that can be reviewed administratively, and it's done by the zoning administrator and the chair of the board. So since we last met, we have reviewed a few administratively, so I'll just give you a short report on those. The first one was actually approved the day after our last meeting, and I think we talked about it at the last meeting. It was installing a window, an egress window in a basement, so that a room that existed in a basement could be converted into a living space. And the address for that was 404 East High Street, so it was in the Historic East Urbana Design Review District, and the case number was 2011 EUDRB01, and that was approved on March 17th. So in fact, I believe that's the date of the last meeting, so I think it was signed right after the meeting. The next one was at 806 West Nevada Street in the Lincoln-Busey corridor, and that was installing a skylight in the front roof of a house, and that was approved on May 5th, 2011, and the number of that case was 2011 LBDRB01. The next one was replacing some damaged siding on two building facades, two sides of an apartment building at 505 South Busey, also in the Lincoln-Busey corridor. And that, the case number was 2011 LBDRB02, and that was approved on June 22nd. And then one that we did just recently, and that was a house on Lincoln, on South Lincoln, 504 South Lincoln. And that was, there's an addition on the rear of the house that had, the main part of the house had a gable roof, and the addition at the rear had a flat roof. And they wanted to replace that flat roof with a gable that was slightly lower, but in the same plane, in the same plane as the main roof. And that was basically to give more space to run mechanical equipment. And the case number there was 2011 LBDRB 03. And I'm sorry I don't have the date that it was approved, but it was, I think, Tuesday, whatever the date Tuesday was. So that's it for me.
Any other reports?
I should have mentioned that there are some additional functions, Jeffrey, before you volunteered to do this.
Okay.
But essentially, certain applications that are submitted to the city staff and that clearly meet design guidelines and is well-defined in advance as something that can be approved administratively. That's reviewed by several staff members and the chair of the DRB, and if they all concur that these clearly qualifies under one of these essentially kind of pre-approved sorts of items, then it can be approved administratively. So this body here's the things that where it takes more discretion and more review, and so some projects are approved administratively and some are approved by this body. I guess they're all still called a COA? Is that what they're called? Called design approval. Okay, that's the piece of paper you hold in your hand when you say, I've got design approval for my project. So I thought maybe.
I can actually just address that. So there are, as you'll, most of you will remember, there are specific criteria that a project has to meet to be able to be reviewed administratively, and it's, don't quote me on this, but it's something along the lines of not increasing a building footprint more than 15%, not increasing a building floor area ratio more than 15%, not increasing or installing new parking, and not substantially changing the mass or scale, not substantially changing the appearance or scale of an existing building. So, for example, with that last case that I described, the roof addition, that roof was on a rear addition to a main house, and from the street you can barely see it, and you certainly wouldn't really see the change in the roof line. Now, if that were a much bigger building, that building, by the way, is one story. It's surrounded by much larger buildings. It's on Lincoln, where the buildings are very big generally. If that were a change in a roof line on the main part of the building, that would come to this body because that would be a substantial change. But this was, you couldn't really see it. It was really minor. It was on a very small house, not a big apartment building, and so on.
There's in your packet. There's called Illinois Open Meetings Act, and it's question and answer format, and this will give you an opportunity to review this at some point. But I thought maybe just with a couple of highlights. One thing. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm breaking my first tip. I was going to tell you is to turn on the make sure that the microphone is on and that you're leaning forward and speaking into it, because we're recording it by tape for the minutes, and then also the meeting is recorded on videotape and is rebroadcast on local television, and it's used for the meeting archive. So I guess my first tip would be to please make sure that the microphone is on. You're leaning forward so we can hear your what you're saying. Illinois Open Meetings Act is a state law, refers to a state law that provides the rules for how public bodies are to conduct their business, and obviously it's conducted in open, so the public has knowledge of the public business taking place. And I'm not going to go over in detail what you have in this handout, but I wanted to give you a couple of things to remember. Maybe one of the main things to know is what it means to be a meeting. So if you have a majority of a quorum, this body is 7 members, so a majority of a quorum would let's say a quorum would be 4, so a majority of a quorum would be 3. So let's say that you're at a party, and like a Christmas party, everyone's having a good time, and everyone's talking with each other, and it just so happens that you realize that there's 3 members of the board all standing around and you're talking. Well, that's one thing, but then if you start talking about public business that's before you, that's essentially a meeting that's taking place because you're conducting public business in at a meeting with the majority of a quorum. So I would just say, in that case, just be cognizant of the fact that that if you find yourself with the majority of a quorum, not to talk about business before you at the time. The other thing that to remember is that what the definition of a meeting is. The definition of meeting can include email in some circumstances. So if you get into a conversation with each other, and sometimes you don't even mean to, sometimes staff member will email everyone the agenda for the meeting and say, we'll see you on that night, and someone emails back a question, and then someone else emails back, and pretty soon it turns into a conversation. There's not a hard and fast rule in the law about what it means specifically about conversation. How long do you have to wait before the different emails to you're actually holding a conversation? But I would say the rule of thumb is to try to avoid a back and forth conversation about any emails that come before you about business that is being conducted by this body. If you have a question, for instance, you can email either Rebecca or myself, and we can be happy to answer questions for you. That's no problem. That's what we're here for. We're here for you as a resource so you can rely on us for anything you might need to do your business well. And so that's something else to watch out for too. Occasionally we'll, it doesn't happen very often, but very occasionally an innocent question by email will turn into a back and forth between commissioners. So let's see, what else was I going to mention? There's actually some training, if you would be so inclined, if you Google Illinois Open Meetings Act training. Lisa Madigan, State Attorney General's office, has online training for members of public bodies in Illinois, and they have a series of questions that you go through and you answer, and I think that's a pretty good beginning to the Illinois Open Meetings Act. We actually have also a local law called Public Bodies. I think it's Section 2-4 of the City Code, and it basically lays out the rules for public hearings, about how long people generally have to speak at public hearings and how to conduct those public hearings. And I'll probably get with you, Jeffrey, later on to talk more specifically about the public meetings and how to some details about conducting the public hearings. I would say maybe the best advice I could give would be to read the bylaws. And I don't remember if you have a fresh copy of the bylaws, but anyone who may not have a copy available to them, let us know and we'll give them a copy of the bylaws. If you read that again and again, it will be so helpful for you in your deliberations, especially if you ever get in a situation where very occasionally you may have a meeting that seems to get out of hand. So the best advice I could give would be to know your rules of procedure and to follow those, especially if things seem to get out of hand. Just follow it to a T, and you can turn to us to help you and to rely on us, and we'll help you get through what may sometimes be a meeting that might feel like it gets out of hand. That's pretty rare with this this board. but it could potentially happen at some point. Dana, you serve on the Plan Commission, and they meet every 2 weeks, and you've been doing this for years, and there's probably not that many meetings that really get out of hand, but sometimes, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes people, they get impassioned. But, and Jeffrey, we can talk about some ideas about how to for how to deal with meetings that, if should they ever get out of hand. And not just real quickly, I'll just tell you one idea that can be used. If you have someone from an audience member who is speaking, or a witness, or an applicant, or whoever it might be, and they are just totally out of line, and they won't just refuse to calm down or to get back on track, or whatever the situation might be. If you could tell them that if there's another outburst, let's say, that we're going to, and if you continue with this, we're going to stop the meeting or take a recess. And you can do that. You can, if things get out of hand, you could say, okay, we're going to take a 5-minute recess, and then you can pull the person aside and say, look, we value what your contribution here tonight, but it needs to be within the limits of our rules of procedure. That's one way to deal with those sorts of things. So that's one idea. Another thing I would mention is to when you had cases before you, when you have applications before you, it's really important to open the public hearing, ask for any public comment, and then close the public hearing. And Jeffrey, you did exactly the right thing when you said, is there anyone in the audience to speak tonight, even though the one audience member here tonight is on one of the other boards and commissions meeting here momentarily. But it's good to get it on the record. State outright, is there anyone here to, we're going to open the public hearing. Is there anyone here to speak tonight on this case? And if not, close the public hearing. Then we'll get that into the record, and in the minutes, we'll have that in the record. If you have a large crowd, one way of dealing with it is, if you want to, you could take it row by row. You could say, first we'll take anyone who wants to speak in favor of the application, and we'll start in the first row, then the second row, then the third row. And anyone who wants to speak against the application, you can start in the first row, second. That's one idea for how to do it. But again, I'd say by following the rules of procedure, that most of the time 95% of the time, that will lead you in the direction you'll need to go. Let's see, trying to remember anything else I thought I would mention. I guess, do any of you have any questions about anything I've said? No? Okay. Again, we're a resource for all of you. We're here to help you and make your work easier. So don't be afraid to call us, email us, ask us for help if you don't understand something, if it's unclear. It's probably not just you, probably more than one person. It's unclear to more than one person. So we need to know that if something is unclear to either you all or to the public. So we'll handle ensuring that all the public notices are made, and that public notice requirements meet all the state and local laws and ordinances. So you don't have to worry about that part. Anything else we should add, Rebecca? Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Robert and Rebecca. Number 11 is a study session. I guess the difference between reports and study session is that there's the study session is more of exchange, dialogue. Okay. Do we have the need for a dialogue on anything? I hear not. Okay. I guess we can move for adjournment. Can I have somebody
I'll move. Make the motion to adjourn.
Second?
I'll second.
Thanks. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign? Okay.